Well, first off, Lynn, thank you for agreeing to do this.
That's all right, you're
It
welcome.
can be very personal sharing a testimony in front of lots of people. So let's begin at the beginning. Could you tell us where you were born, where you were brought up, what your early years were?
So I was born in a little town near Wigan in the 60s. Only child. Mum didn't work, she was a housewife, and my dad was at that time a civil servant. So that's my background in that respect. We weren't a large family. Again, I was an only child, or am an only child, and I didn't have a lot of family. But we were a close family, and we all lived very close together. And my parents and I used to come for our holidays to Cleveland's for as long as I can remember. And I loved it, and they loved it. And my mum told me this, that one day my dad said to her, "One day, Vera, we will live here." And she said that she made the classic comment. She said, "Yes, dear."
Yeah, the old yes,
But
dear.
a long story short, with my dad's dream and my mum's practical bent, when I was 7, we actually did move here. So when I was 7, we did what many people do and moved to our holiday destination. And I know for all of their lives, and even for me now, there still is an element of not quite believing that I get to live here, and that there is the beach and the sea so close by, and the beautiful fresh air, and the joy of living somewhere that I had wanted to live.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my early years up till about the age of 7.
Thank you. And isn't there something about living here when at times it seems like, do I really live here?
Yes.
I'm at the freefront, the seagull sound, it's like, that's when I was on holiday, I actually live here now.
And driving home from somewhere ordinary, driving along the promenade, seeing the sea, and in all its everything from glorious sunshine like we get now to in the wintertime when the waves are coming up. But we get to do that.
All the time. It's absolutely wonderful, isn't it? So you were 7 when you came here.
7 when we came here.
And could you tell us then, once you got here, which school did you go to?
Yeah, I went to Anchor's Own School.
Right.
And very early days, I met a really good friend, Julie Hancock. And I'd moved into the area. She had been at the school before. They had moved away and come back. So by 2 different means, we ended up kind of new girls together. And Julie and I have known each other from that point. We very quickly became friends for all our lives. But you know her better as Julie Barlow.
Oh, right. So it's year 2. Would have been 7, wouldn't it? Round about year 2 as we know it now.
As we know
So that was
it,
I was going to say you and Julie still friends, but you've bit the question. Julie Barlow.
Julie Barlow.
And you're still good, close friends.
Over the years, our lives have sometimes diverged quite a bit and sometimes come closer together. But and it's the kind of friendship where after years maybe of us, we've never lost touch completely, but we've always sent birthday cards and things like that, but different times diverge. But always when we've come back together, it's as if there's been no years in the past.
That is amazing, isn't it? There's always a friend you know when the phone goes and you pick it up, you just talk as if nothing's ever gone. All the years didn't matter. There's something there, isn't there? There's a bond that's so hard to explain, and yet it just rekindles instantaneously, or it can do. And so it's Julie.
Julie,
And we know Julie spoke this morning a little bit of her own prayer life and the things she's accepted. So would you mind telling us then, as you moved here at 7, had you come across a church prior to moving to Cleveland's, or was your first exposure to Christianity when you got here?
So I was raised in the Anglican church. My mum had a really strong living faith for as long as I can remember. My dad had been raised in the church, but at that time he didn't really go to church. His was a more distant relationship with God. I'm delighted to say that as time went by and as the years went by, and people here at this church, some of them will remember my dad, he began to come to the 9 a.m. service. And then as time went on more and more, he developed the as living and real and immediate for him a faith as my mum had, and as I think I have as well. So I was raised with that background, and we went to a very old church where we were before, the parish church, traditional setting, a bit like Bispham Parish Church. And I went along to Sunday school and was in all of those kinds of things. So when we moved here, obviously Mum was anxious to continue that. And this is literally 5 minutes walk away from here. Okay. So it was the obvious church for her to come to. At the time it was a very modern building, but very traditional service, the prayer book service, and very like what she had experienced before. So she found herself very much at home here, and she very quickly made friends as well, and it became part of her life. So I went along to Sunday school, but I have to say, I can't really put my finger on what it was, but it didn't do anything for me.
No,
it's the only way to explain it.
Sure, please.
And I'd been to Sunday school, but it happened in the morning at my old church, and this one happened in the afternoon. So one of the downsides was that it took up my last free afternoon of the weekend before school. Yeah. So that didn't go in his favour. No. And so after keep on at my mum about, do I have to go to Sunday school, do I have to go to Sunday school? She did the classics, she gave me a choice and said, well, either you can go to Sunday school or you can come to church with me. So I picked church because it happened in the morning. So I got it over with.
Not this morning, you didn't?
No, I had to come back for a second go. So I went along in the morning, and I have discussed this with my mum in the past, and she said how embarrassed she was because I wriggled, squirmed, and generally was unsettled through any number of morning services at our church. Because honestly, I was bored and they weren't relevant. So I wasn't, and I was a child. However, running alongside this, there came a point when I went into my second to last year of junior school. I always struggle now with this year 3 and year 5 and things like that. So the year that I was turning 9, 10. And Anchor's Home School was a very progressive school at the time, even more so than it is now. But that year's teacher was a very old school. And she shouted a lot. And she threatened a lot. And you couldn't work out when what you might do might set her off. I'm not criticising her as a teacher as such, it was the old style, but it was completely the wrong way for me because I was a very shy, very, very sensitive, introvert little girl. So you didn't need to shout at me. Just tell me what you want me to do and I'll do it. And if you're shouting, even if you're not shouting at me, I couldn't compute why that had to be. So eventually, not only did I become afraid of her, but I became afraid of school. And it became more and more a part of my life. And even when I moved into the next year, and that year's teacher was a lovely teacher, so for the last year of junior school, that had become a part of my perception of school. So there are many weekends that I can remember on a Sunday evening that was the hardest time, knowing that I would have to face 5 more days of uncertainty. So I was living with lovely parents in a lovely home. We had not much money, but loads of love, in a beautiful place that was a place I wanted to be, and I was miserable. So into this setting, one morning, I'm sitting in our church, one morning service, and I have to say, I have no recollection of who was speaking or any of what they said. But I can only think they must have been talking about something which caused me to assess and consider all the stories that I had picked up over the years of being exposed to a church environment about Jesus and his life, and about love your enemy, love your neighbour, the story of the Good Samaritan, the story of the prodigal son, all of those things. And I remember thinking, if this were real, this would be an amazing way to live. And I wasn't just thinking it'd be an amazing way for me to live. I was thinking this would be an amazing way if the world functioned like this, because everybody would be looking out for everybody else. So it would all be, and as this was going on in my head, and I do remember thinking, if this were real. And I can only say that from one second to the next, it was real. And I was absolutely convinced that, and I can recollect I was sitting around about there, not in the front row, about 2 or 3 rows back, with my mum and various other people. And I was absolutely certain that Jesus was real, not only as a man who lived in the Bible, but was real now and was effectively standing behind my chair. I knew that if I turned around, I wouldn't actually see him, but I was absolutely certain he was there. And he was there for me to help. Nothing more than that. But don't forget, I'm about 10 or 11 years old.
Yeah.
So our church, as I've said, was very traditional. It was a very quiet service. So you didn't clap, you didn't do anything, only listen. So I sat with my bottom on the seat firmly, but inside I was bouncing. I wanted to jump up and down and clap and do all sorts of things, and I was very good and I didn't do that. But I bounced home with my mum, and any of this worries about school and everything, they hadn't gone away. They'd just been completely overtaken by this that was happening. So when we got home, I said to my mum, can we go back to church in the evening? She did an amazing job of not looking at me like I'd actually and said, yes, of course. Because don't forget, I'm 10 or 11, so I need somebody to come with. Plus, I've never been to an evening service either. We don't go to evening service, we went to the 10:30. So that's what we did. My dad was a bit stunned as well, because we're all getting ready, and he said, where are you going? Because we never went back. And she did a really good job. She said, Lynn would like to go back to church. And that's all she said. And he went, oh, okay. And off we went. So they clearly had some idea something was going on with the night, because I never actually spoke to them about it. So we get to the evening service. This time, I remember exactly who was speaking. And I remember exactly what they spoke about. And it was Peter and Barry Chiver's dad, Cliff. And he spoke on the resurrection. And he took every argument that's been put forward about the resurrection that is not the resurrection, and systematically, with reason, looking at the facts and the evidence, not only in the Bible, but outside, beyond that, from things like the punishment for a Roman centurion who fell asleep on duty, and demolished every argument. So the only one that you were left with, and the only one that therefore held true with all of what we knew, was the resurrection. So I would say I have a twofold conversion.
Yeah.
In the morning, I had something amazing that is completely unexplainable, and to me still today, I have no real explanation other than it happened. And then in the evening, a perfect explanation of the central focus of the Christian faith, Jesus' death and resurrection. Nobody could have orchestrated that.
No.
But then we aren't God, are we?
And it is an interesting fact, isn't it? It's why I wanted to do this kind of testimony, how we go from 1 minute thinking it could be nice little stories that we tell to children, we sing a nice song, and then the next minute, it's real.
Yes.
Something happens.
Yes.
God does something, and it's hard to articulate, isn't it? And
yes.
you just know. And then you came that evening, and in a way it was reaffirmed. Here are the reasons. Because
yes.
there's a lot of intellectual reasons not to believe in God today, aren't
Absolutely.
they? And as you raised there, I read something about, in the 70s, as you said, progressive, there was lots of children learn their own way, we don't need to tell them what to do. And I remember in the 80s, James Dobson wrote a book called Dare to Discipline as a Christian Response. Do you remember that book?
Right.
And that was the response. But you have this idea that, so as you move on in your faith, how did you develop? Was it more for you as this young girl? Was it not intellectual, but was it more of God took you on deeper into the knowledge of Scripture, and was the understanding of a level of what was taught important to you? How did you develop where you went? Because it can be, can't it, that we know out there are hundreds of arguments, and last week we said the biggest one is why does evil exist?
Yes.
So was it that kind of journey that you went on?
I think the answer to that is yes, but it wasn't that clear cut, and I wouldn't have been able to say that to you at the time. It's only with hindsight. Because I was taught to reason things. So I've said to people in many ways I should not be a Christian because I have been taught to reason the logic, the evidence for something, and God defies that, really. But having said that, the path that I took, I'm sure God had that in mind, but I didn't know that at the time. So the first thing that I wanted to do then, I did want to be confirmed. So as I'd been raised in the Anglican church, so I'd been baptised as a child. So it was my choice to go forward for confirmation, and it meant something to me. It wasn't because I'd got to a certain age and was going through the process. So that was the first thing. And actually, incidental to that, it really wasn't, but it was quite helpful for me. My godparents bought me 2 books at my confirmation that were on the bookstall. And they were 2 books on a series of 6 that are the Bible stories in picture strip. So they abandoned all the long lists of names and all the how high they built the temple and all of that kind of thing. And it enabled me to have a proper narrative of the Old Testament, which I had no clue about at all up to then. So it's amazing how that, and gradually I picked up all the books because I wanted to read more of them, so I now actually have them all. So that was a very simple little thing that was helped me move on. The other thing I wanted to do, the minute you start to, God becomes real for you, you then start to want to do something for him. And so it came into my mind that if I had this problem that I can't really identify, and it's not really anyone's fault or anything that they were doing in the Sunday school, but if I had that issue with, then why didn't I go into that and work in that area? So that's what I did, and I began to help out in our Sunday school and then to teach in our Sunday school. So amongst the leaders were a number of mature Christians who were also teaching. So my mum was a Sunday school teacher. Kath Marsh, who's here around here somewhere, was a Sunday school teacher. Yeah. Joan Booth, and our Sunday school superintendent at the time was the lovely Paulette Bousfield. So I had this group of more mature, more experienced Christians. Yeah, we were all doing a certain thing, but they were still around to give that support and wisdom, really. And along with that, though, there were a group of my contemporaries. Julie, myself, Kath and Ian's youngest son, Graham, was one of our teachers as well. Another friend, Joanne, who later married Chris Booth, who's Joan and Kyle's Booth's older son. So we had, there were a group of my contemporaries also learning together about our faith. So in that respect, and because I was teaching, I was learning while I was teaching the kids. So that's where I say God orchestrated things. Now, one of the girls who was teaching was a bit older than us. She was probably about 5 years older than us, Carolyn. And she met a great guy from the church down the road, the Methodist church called Derek. And they got married. And they decided they wanted to set up a group for more young adults, kind of. And so we all went along to that. That's where I first prayed aloud. That's where I first spoke in tongues. So we were, again, and we were learning ourselves at that point. Bispham Parish Church had their own youth group, so we would also begin to get involved there, and I gained another group of friends who, again, have been part of my life ever since. So that's where I met Sandra and Ian Wilkes, Derek and Christine Wilkes, two friends who many of you won't know because they still go to Bispham, but called Denise and Martin Ormond. They are, and especially the women, have simply walked alongside me, really, through the ups and downs of my life. But their husbands as well, because obviously I know them independently, not just because they happened to marry my friends. So there was this amazing support group of contemporary Christians all discovering God together, but at different levels. And Bispham had a praise service once a month in the evening, and gradually more of us got involved. I know, Peter, you were involved, weren't you? And Barry got involved in all different ones. You know, Graham used to play, you know, we all got involved. And so that was a freer worship setting where, again, we could explore these kinds of things. So they're just some of the things. And then there came a time when I was asked would I help with the teenager groups, not just the children's groups. And so then Barry Chivers and I led a youth group, and there's somebody here who was part of that as well. Yeah, Naomi Nunn. Yes. And Amanda? Yeah.
Who was yesterday made an ALM.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So from what you're saying then, the importance of friendship in church, of groups, of places to explore the faith is important to grow. And as you said, that free service once a month where you can be freer to worship and experiment and pray out loud. And that's what we've got now, once a month.
Yes.
So that was important in forming you, that you had this friendship group of similar age.
Yes.
And it also speaks, does it not, to the faithfulness of those that taught?
Oh, absolutely.
And the strength of their own convictions in Christ. And without them and their witness and their encouragement, there would be no you sat
because
there right now.
it wasn't just what they were preaching and speaking, you know, my mum and Kath.
Yeah.
It was watching how they live their lives as well. The two gel together.
Yes, they do.
You know,
which is what we said this morning, wasn't it? You can spot a fake a mile off.
Yeah.
And we know someone in this church one day who may sit where you are, who said he watched his brother for years on end to say, go on then, see if I can trip you up. And never did. And it was that brought the faith that this, this is real, this is true.
Yeah.
And you saw in them something true and real, and their love for you and their desire to develop your faith over time, allowing you the reason to the space.
Yeah.
So by now you were 10, you've joined a group. So you obviously finished primary school. Which secondary school did you attend?
So I went to Montgomery.
Montgomery, opposite Bispham.
Yes.
Yeah. So you journeyed through there.
Yes.
You're still a Christian.
Yes.
You must have come across science and teachers and those who wish to say none of this is true.
It was a very different and positive experience from my junior school, because by that time I must have become a Christian around about the time towards the end of my last year at junior school, moving into senior school. And it dawned on me a few months into senior school that I was happy from all of this misery and trauma.
Yep.
And I can't quite explain to you how that happened logically, because I'm sure it wasn't a logical thing. The difference was the Christian faith.
Yes.
So I did. I went on in that way. And my experience of senior school was a much more positive experience than those last years in junior school. Even though there's no criticism of my junior school, they were doing a good job. It was me and what happened and, all of that really. So I went on to sixth form, and I was heading towards university. But the last year of my sixth form, I began to question whether university was where I wanted to go, whether it was right for me. But I was on this train, and it's a hard thing to stop something like that, isn't it, really?
Very much.
Especially if you've no specific reason to stop it. So I'm sure I would have ended up at university. But about 12 months before, I had gone for a job, a clerical job in the civil service. And I have to hold my hand up here and be honest, even as a Christian. The reason I had done it was really to get experience of interviews. Because I knew I would be having interviews for my university, and I'd never done an interview before. So I had no intention of taking the job if it was offered. It was offered, and I turned it down. So that's not a great Christian example, but that goes to show when none of us perfect, isn't it amazing that God loves us even so. So I'd moved on, but I was on this train and wondering whether it was the right journey. And I got a telephone call out of the blue from a lady from the personnel department of Department of Work and Pensions at Norcross. And she said to me, would I still be interested in a clerical job at the civil service? Well, the short answer was yes, but there were so many hurdles. It was only 6 weeks before I took my exams. There's no way I was going to walk away from those exams after all that time and effort. And so there was time to take the exams and the revision and telling everybody. And there was just this whole load of... And one by one, she just demolished them all. Because it's fine, yeah, tell us when you want to start, yes. You can have all the time you want for your exams. You need time for it, yeah, that's fine, just tell us whatever. So one by one, they were just all gone. And I do remember thinking, this door isn't just opening a bit, this door is swinging wide open here. So I walked through. So I started my career in the civil service. I picked my own start date. I was scarcely there for the first 2 months because I was either off revising or taking exams. But they let me do all of that. I picked what I wanted to do, and I did sit my exams. And I'm so glad I did, really, and didn't walk away from that. So then I ended up, as I say, in the civil service with a different school to learn from, if you see it, because there was time then to learn about people and interpersonal skills and things like that, as well as book learning. Mm-hmm. So that was how I ended up where I ended up working, and which has been my career ever since. On a sort of personal level, as time went by, my life didn't follow what you might expect and what does for a lot of people. So I never did find the guy that I wanted to spend my life with. So I never have been married and never had any children. I'm really blessed with a number of fabulous godchildren who I am so delighted that they want me as part of their life. But my life did not follow the classic lines, and I'm single to this day. Sometimes that's been easier than others, but over the last few years in particular, it's become clear to me that that wasn't so much because I never found the right person. It was because it was right for me to remain single. And I am at peace with my single life, which is great to feel, really.
Without being too personal, was there any times when you wondered that you saw your friends marrying, and was there times you wondered what God was up to?
Oh, yeah.
Many times.
Yeah. Why is that? Why is that person? Is that not happening for me?
Yeah.
And how long will I have to wait? And at what point do you decide that you need to find some kind of stability in your life, if you see what I mean? Mm-hmm. So you're not forever waiting for when that person might come along, you need to change your life around. It's time to go, right, I need to find some continuity here, and this is the life that I've got. Yep. And it was really only when someone asked me a question and I gave an off-the-cuff answer that was not the answer I was expecting to give. They asked me why I'd never been married. And I gave an off-the-cuff answer and said it was my choice, which was not what I was expecting to say.
But did you find the person asking you the question, was there no kind of sense of, oh, hang on a minute, why are you asking a question? Because it's quite a thing to ask someone, isn't it?
Yes, it was. And I don't really want to go into too much
detail.
No,
I understand that.
The context, they were not asking it in a prying way. Yeah. It was a genuine question that came out of a conversation.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. I understand that, because we all know in Christian life it can be.
Yeah.
It can be used as a way of trying to find something out and then make a statement of, but that wasn't how it was.
But that was helpful because it enlightened me about something about myself.
Yeah.
And again, helped that journey.
And now
So-
you would say, as you've just done, that you're at peace in that and are blessed.
Yes.
And don't feel, not, again, I want to be careful with my language here, you don't feel that you've lost or been robbed of something. You feel the Lord is
No.
still in with you
Yes.
within all of that.
Yes, and I am beginning to see that I can do, because I don't have those commitments. And there's some of the commitments that Sarah was talking about this morning, you know, all of those things, the children and the husband and all those things. Because I don't have those, that does enable God to use me in a different way than he would be able to if I had all those commitments.
Which leads me to my next question. What do you, as you've journeyed, as you've gone through this journey, where do you feel God may be calling you now, next, in the future? If you have no idea, that's fine. But is there anything you feel the Lord will want you to do?
Well, there were a couple of instances where God guided me in to enable me to move on in my knowledge of him. And in one circumstance, I did consider going back to university. But as I began to work out that, I asked God for a sign. And I do remember, it wasn't wrong to ask him for a sign, but the attitude with which I asked him was wrong, because I asked with a certain arrogance, not really weighing what I was asking. And he did answer, and he did give me a sign, and I remember asking for a sign I couldn't miss. And he did give me a sign I couldn't miss. And without going into too much detail, it was a huge thing. And what happened was, something happened, and there is no explanation, nor the experts involved have no explanation. But from the moment I realised that I had asked for a sign, and this could well be the sign, it was therefore a sign for me to stay, not to go. So what was happening, if I would stay, and I would do that happily, there was no need for that situation, those things to keep happening. And all I can say to you is, from the moment I made that decision, those things simply stopped. And the people involved have no explanation. Not only was there no obvious, I asked, and they have no explanation for what happened. Not to me, but to someone else. And so that taught me for the first time that although God graciously allows us to call him Abba, Dad, he is still Almighty God.
Yes.
And all he did was give me a glimpse
Of the power.
And he frightened me to death.
Yeah.
Until I was able to assimilate that actually that almighty power is normally backing me up,
Yes.
not ranged against me. So that was one really quite big step forward in terms of my knowledge and understanding of God. So we move on, and the couple who are running our group, he's going off to be to the ministry. And on the last day when we were meeting as a group, he gave us all a prophecy. And the prophecy he gave to me, he spoke them aloud and then gave us a copy. He gave last because it was very different from the ones that the others had got. And he understood that he was giving me quite a difficult prophecy to read. And we have discussed this since, and he was very unsure whether to give it. But I was able to reassure him that it was a very hard thing to hear at the time, but it was the right thing to do. Because it was only because of that prophecy that I remained within fingertip touching of my Christian faith. Because it was warning me of the start of a very, very difficult time. But that there was no way to avoid this difficult time in order for God's future plans for me. And the difficult time had started. So there was an awful lot of death in my family within that year. Also, my friends group, we lost a close friend to suicide. And at the end of it all, my mother died suddenly. By which time, I had begun to think, well, if that's what God's playing, then I'm not playing. And effectively, I walked away from God for about 3 or 4 years, really. Thought I'd do it on my own. and thought I could stand like a rock in the middle of it all, and it wouldn't get me. And it took 3 or 4 years, but in the end, one of my managers had to bring me home from work because I had had a breakdown and I couldn't carry on. And a friend had to bring my car home to the office because I couldn't even drive the car home. So that's where it had taken me, because I wouldn't trust God, because he'd let so many horrible things happen. How could he? But anyway, I was at home for probably about a week. I'd been to see the doctor, but I wasn't on any kind of medication at this point or anything. I think it was just too early. They hadn't got round to doing it. And I was in bed one evening, obviously clearly not sleeping, didn't care what I wanted to eat, didn't care what I wore, and was going into more and more of a decline, and didn't know what the future held. But then I had this moment of realization, and I have said to people in the past that there can be many times in your life when you think you can't go on, but there can come a time when you know you can't, but you only really know the difference when you get there. And effectively, I got there in the middle of the depth of the night, one night, and realized that I had by this time nothing left to lose by giving God a chance. How arrogant, again, is that? Although I truly wasn't arrogant then, there was no arrogance in me, because I was completely broken. So for the first time in 4 years, I prayed to God with no agenda.
Yes.
And all I wanted to know was if you... And I didn't formulate much more than, God, if you're real, help me. And what happened was, in less than a minute, I had one thought in my mind. It absolutely consumed my mind. I didn't know if I could do it, and no medical person, I don't think anybody at all, would have even suggested it. But it completely consumed my mind, and I knew that if I wanted to get better, I had to try to do this. And it was, go to work. What clinician in their right mind would say, you're right, you've been off a week with kind of all this, we won't bother with any medication, just go back to work. But I was convinced if I wanted to get better, that's what I had to try to do. And I went to sleep, which is not something I'd done in a good while. Woke up fairly early in the morning in time to talk to my dad and say I'm going to work. He picked up on this determination. I didn't know if I could do it, but I was going to try. And he got up with me and, made sure that I didn't have anything else to do than was after, sorted some lunch out for me and things. And one of the hardest things I have ever done is drive my car through Walbrook House gates that morning.
Yeah.
Went to my main boss, and as I opened the door and she looked up and saw me, I know exactly what she said, and I know the tone of voice she said it in. She said, "Oh, hello, we weren't expecting to see you quite so soon." And I said to her, "No, I don't know how long I can stick it. I'm here for the day. I'm here for as long as I can stick it. I don't know if I'll last the day." Great for your manager, isn't it, really? But I didn't care. And that's how I felt. She said all the right things. And I went out, and then I was managing a team of 16 staff at this point. So it's not just me trying to keep myself together. I'm supposed to be trying to orchestrate so that 16 other people can get their jobs done. All I can say to you is, I did get better from 5 minutes to the next. And through that, God seemed to be braced his arms around me, not holding me, but braced as if they were made of rock around me. And nothing got through for a good chunk of time because I wasn't strong enough to handle any of the arrows the devil might have tried, even the tiniest. So none of them got through. The amount of meetings got changed and all kinds of things because I don't know if it's because I couldn't cope with them, but I would find something that I couldn't cope with. Normally it wouldn't have bothered me, and I would then find it had got moved. So I didn't need to do it till next week when it was all right.
Yeah.
And gradually, as I say, I got better from 5 minutes to the next.
And it's a very powerful testimony in that often we try and sell Christianity as a kind of a balm. And at
Yes.
times the Lord will bring us to our knees, it seems, doesn't he? And when you mentioned the sign, I said when I was doing this ministry, people always say, did God say, it's you? And you've got to try and explain what a sign is. And I said, I need a sign. But, you know, intellectuals will scoff and say it was just coincidence. But so
Yeah.
you know that this is God
Yeah.
and that he has done this. And that old phrase of he hems us in behind and before could often mean he leaves us nowhere else to turn. And then when we turn back to him, we find those arms are very, very strong. But unfortunately, I think for us humans, we come on his terms, and his terms is the cross. We don't come our own way. And like you said, it's that journey, that developing, that learning, and the great people that have been witnesses to you. And I can look out at those that have seen here when God could have looked like he's abandoned them, and yet their faith has remained strong. And they are a witness to this God in the midst of everything. Lynn, thank you. There's 1 or 2 more questions I have, but time is beginning to get away. Because what I wanted to ask you then finally is, if you were to look out at someone here who did not believe, what would you say to them that God has made a difference in your life? What would you say to them to convince them that the Lord Jesus Christ you serve would make a difference to them?
You've probably picked up from some of the things that I've said that anxiety has been a factor in my life. From this this girl that was an introvert, shy, etc. I am absolutely certain that if I had never found God, that little girl would have grown up into an anxious and sort of introverted woman who would have found, even in spite of medication, I feel sure that her anxiety not only defined her, but overwhelmed her life. So that really I would only be existing with it. The difference God has made is I do still have anxiety from time to time. It is something that I have to deal with, and I understand that probably will always be a factor. But one, it is easier with God. It doesn't make it easy and he doesn't take it away, but it is easier. And also, he has enabled me not only to live my life so that the anxiety neither defines me nor overwhelms me, but has enabled me to have and live the most amazing life, which truly is life in all its fullness. It's the difference between existence and not even just living, but living this amazing life with God. And it's only an ordinary life. There's nothing special about my life. And yet it feels amazing to me.
Yes, exactly. Thank you so much. Can you give a round of applause? Thank you, Lynn. It's wonderful, isn't it? And you just said something there. It's just an ordinary life, but is it when you've got the Lord and you're a witness? And actually, Lynn, the reason that I chose that Timothy, which was the wrong one, was Timothy himself. Mike, my dear brother, you're going to be teaching the Bible over the net. Would you agree? Timothy was quite a timid man, Mike, wasn't he, himself? Quite an anxious man. And Paul says, take some wine for your stomach. That's why he says here, be bold. Timothy was easily intimidated. He didn't like conflict. And yet in this Christ, he ends up in prison. He comes out of prison. He's Paul's great, because God took hold of him like you.
It was the perfect reading.
And makes him this rock, this witness. And Timothy was just an ordinary man.
Because I can't quite compute that I am even able to sit up here and do this and do so many of the things that I've done in my life, knowing that little girl that started where she started from. And the only difference is God. He's the only reason, because it's only because you have him that you have the courage to step out and take a chance on what you know or you believe he's telling you or guiding you to do.
Thank you.
Okay.